Hey, First Assembly, welcome back for another session of our Parenting on Purpose series. When we left off, we were still focusing on the foundation of our calling, which I'm okay with stretching it out as we have over. This will be the third session. I'm okay with that because there's a lot to cover and there are things I didn't want to skip over. So when we last left off, as you see on your screen, we were talking about knowing how to do right and knowing why to do right are two different things. Let's not just teach our kids to act in a way where people say, wow, they're really well behaved, and that's great. And that's wonderful. I love getting compliments like that. But the reason that our kids were well behaved in restaurants, the reason our grandkids and my daughter and son-in-law often get compliments about their kids is because they've been taught the principle underneath that is to be other-oriented. We don't scream and throw a fit in a restaurant. We don't throw things in a restaurant. We don't do it because that disturbs other people. It's that idea of otherness. We care about what's going on around us. We want to care about the people around us. And so we want to equip them and empower them to think Christianly, to think biblically, not just act a certain way. So, and let's look at how we do that and when we do that and those types of things. The greatest periods of training take place in periods of non-conflict. Think about that. It's kind of a strange photo there on the slide. Probably a mom and a dad and a son there driving off somewhere, but I think about how many great conversations we've had in a car or in our vehicle, in our van when we're going somewhere when our kids were younger. And still the conversations I will have with my youngest daughter that will take place in times of non-conflict. Because we can try to educate and lecture our kids in times of conflict, but it's not usually the best time to do it. Think of your own life. Think about when you're really upset, or maybe you've done something wrong and you're so mad at yourself, let alone you don't want to hear a lecture from your boss or anyone else at that time. And it's better to wait. And so many times, let that be a side lesson here, parents. Please. There are times that many times that I have to tell myself to talk to my daughter about this now, or in the past to my oldest daughter or my two sons, to talk to them now is not ideal. I need to wait, but I can't let it go by either, because that would be a neglectful thing on my part, a sinful thing on my part. If I'm going to let something pass for the moment or just wait, but then I don't go back to it, I've missed an opportunity. So I need to make sure I'm going to go back to it. If you're a forgetful person, then you write it down somewhere. Make a reminder for yourself to go back and talk about it during a time of non-conflict. But see, right there, I was talking about after the fact, but really my main point is before you even get there. And that's the kind of the metaphor of the drive going on the slide there and the conversations we would have in the car. If we're on our way to someone's house, that's the time when our kids were younger to review with them. Hey, remember, if other kids are running through the house, what are you going to do? Well, we're not going to run. Why aren't you going to run? It's to have kids not only remind them of what's expected, but have them ask them the principle. Think of that. Think of the beauty of that. I get excited about this because, repetition is a great teaching method. And even though it's frustrating maybe to sit and hear something repeated over and over, but for them to hear it again, but to say it, that the percentage of what we take in as a learner, if we just read something, we'll remember 10%. And I'm sure it's even less than that. But if we process it by talking and being involved in it, it goes up to 90%. And we need to keep that in mind as Christian parents, because let's not go into lecture mode. Ask our kids. Let them say it. Let them be empowered by it. Let them hear themselves saying it, because then it becomes even more ingrained in who they are. And we want to take this, the kids are more teachable in times of non-conflict. Adults are more teachable in times of non-conflict, right? And you think back to the Shema. Think back to our previous session when we talked about the hero Israel, the Lord our God is one, love the Lord your God. But then it goes on to talk about him when you're by the way and when you rise up. And when those are times of non-conflict. There's something embedded there that sometimes we miss in that passage. That it's talk about them when you're fighting with your kids. Talk about them when they're disobeying you. It's make God conversation throughout your entire day and throughout your entire life in times of non-conflict, so that they're equipped when those times do come. So sometimes when I teach this in a classroom, I might have people even role play driving in a car and the things they might talk to their kids about or remind them about when it comes to, hey, we're going to such and such house, and their kids are pretty can be pretty mean and or can be pretty crazy, and but that doesn't mean that things are suspended for you, right? It's easy to be a reactive parent, to only deal with things when they come up. The proactive parent, the authoritative parent, the biblical parent is the one who lives by Psalm 78 and Deuteronomy chapter 6 and makes it a part of everyday life. So it's more effort, to teach in non-conflict. But teaching children to have a sensitivity, a sensitive heart for God, to what they should do is more godly than suppressing the bad things. Think about that. So it's not enough to train children to act morally, right? It's not enough to train them to act like nice little Christian kids. They also have to think it. And I know I've said that before, and it's a kind of a review, but the how is the action. How do I act in this world? Okay. But then the why is the principle. You have to involve the principle. It's not just this is how you act as a Christian, because if I don't give them the biblical principle behind it, if I don't take the time, again, it takes more effort to be this kind of parent. But if I'm lazy about it and I don't take the time, or if I just say do it because I said so, or do it or else, I've not really done what I'm supposed to do. I've given them the how, and I've given them kind of a surfacey why, but I've not really given them a why that empowers them to make a decision, to be a Christ follower in this world. Think about this. I am not advocating for you, and I think you've got this already. The authoritarian parent is usually very harsh. Authoritative parent takes the time to explain things. The authoritative parent is also focuses on forgiveness, and one of our sessions is going to be on repentance and forgiveness and restoration and those kinds of things to make them an everyday part of your family. But anyway, I think that we can look at even what I've explained so far over these past few sessions and say, well, yeah, that's the kind of kid I'm going to have. We're not going to be flexible, and but no, that's not it at all. It's love and grace, and it's correction, and it's consequences. It's all that kind of stuff. But it's respecting the context of biblical truth. Okay, let's go back to the illustration I mentioned last time of don't run in church because it's God's house. That's not a good reason. I mean, some of you might be saying, well, we want to respect, we want to have reverence here. At certain times, I suppose, but let's not make so much of the building that it's that it's way more than a building, and let's not give them reasons that aren't ones which they can make other decisions and base their faith. Or not running in church because it's God's house is not one. So context is so important. It's important from a Bible study standpoint. Those of you who study the Bible and have heard great teachers, like Pastor Carl and Dr. Dan and others, context must be held in biblical studies, but it must be held also in biblical living. Don't raise a child to just know how to respond in a certain situation. But we want them to be able to be driven by the principle behind it. We don't want them to learn how to play church, okay? We want them to understand the context, and we want to respect the context behind it. I heard the example a long time ago of boys who were told, you need to go to sleep, don't you? And a parent said, don't get out of bed. Okay, so in a very legalistic, authoritarian home, one of the boys falls off the top bunk and gets hurt. The boy on the bottom bunk stays in his bunk because mom and dad don't get out of their bunk. But in a house that respects biblical standards and respects the context of the moment, the child on the bottom knows, of course, he can get up to help his brother. Because why? Because we've already equipped him with a sense of otherness. It's the sense of others. I do this because of others. My brother is hurt. That's the higher principle. Love God and love others, not stay in bed. Okay, so context matters, and we teach our kids context. We understand there are times where a child who knows that they're supposed to be home at a certain time, and they stopped on the side of the road because they saw an accident and they helped someone, maybe. Mom and dad, you need to respect the context of that. You have a child who's living out the gospel. Again, those kinds of things tend to well up tears in my eyes, because when we see our kids grow up and start to embrace thinking like a believer and demonstrating God in this world, as just one of the greatest things. And so context prevents a parent from becoming a legalist too. Again, think of this in two ways: biblical context when studying the Bible, but also in living the Bible. Okay, in studying the Bible, I don't have the right to make up stuff to tell my child to obey it. I've heard people say, well, it's in the Bible, that's why. What? And then they say it like, that's not in the Bible at all. I mean, somebody made that up to make you obey something, and let's not do that. The Word of God does not deserve to be treated that way. That's disrespecting the Word of God. Don't put things in God's mouth. Don't put things in. And so sometimes I think we put up these signposts of what it means to be a Christian and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to behave. And many times the Bible doesn't say that at all. And I know I'm going to go back to it again. You've heard it. This is the third time. Don't run in church because it's God's house. That's setting up a legalistic standard that kids are going to see right through that when they get older. And so, but then the context of how we live that out too. See, legalism ignores context. It removes the principle. It removes the opportunity from the heart of the child. I had the opportunity to empower to my child that we don't run through the fellowship hall, or we don't run through the foyer, or we don't run to and I promise I'm going to leave this illustration because I know I'm beating it to death. We don't lose these. I'm not going to give up this opportunity. We don't do this thing. We don't run here because somebody could get hurt. There was a time many years ago that my wife and I and three of our kids, before Christina was a part of our family, and we were in New York City. We had been speaking on the East Coast kids camps, and we always took advantage of those kinds of trips and did trips outside of just going to the campground. And it was so cool we stayed in New Jersey, took the bus into New York City, but that we did as much as we can. I'm a type A person when it comes to vacation. Many times I've got a long list of all the things we could do. If it's a long vacation, I've got planned every day what we could do, like the 5 different things we could do on each of those days, certain things that we are going to do. And I tend to try to pack in a lot. So we walked and walked. We were in Manhattan. We were in the Bronx. We were all over the place, seeing all these iconic things that we had seen in movies, and the triangle-shaped building in Times Square. And we also like to live frugally. So we ate breakfast at our hotel before we went into, and then here we are getting to the evening, and we had a snack in the middle of the day. We try to do a cheaper snack, especially in New York City. There's nothing cheap. Holding over till dinner. So, but we wanted dinner, at least I wanted dinner to be iconic New York. So we find a New York deli that has New York pizza too. And so we sit down to eat. Our feet are hurting, and we've had it's getting dark and it's summertime. So we've walked a lot that day, and we started the day pretty early. And here we are, finally getting to eat. We're all famished. We're all finally going to sit down. And my oldest daughter looks out the window and she says, "Can I give my food to someone?" Now, in my mind, if I want to take a legalistic route, I paid for that. We walked all day. I know you're hungry. But the context of the moment is that she looked out and she saw a person who was not very well off. Someone definitely living on the streets. And she said, can I give my food to him? And that was a long time ago. But again, when you see your kids live out a love for God, when you've put it in their hearts and you see them actually making sense of it and it becomes part of them, oh, it means so much. And all four of my kids done it, and I don't leave any of them out. I have many stories from each one of them. This is just one. But for Daniela to walk out there, and I watched closely through the window. I let her do it, kind of actually stepped out. Yeah, I did step out onto the sidewalk, so I was close enough to her. And she gave her slice of pizza and her fruit and that to that man. And, of course, the context of that moment was she was living out a biblical principle. It was others oriented. So I'm not going to come down on you're hungry and this and that, but what can I do as a believer, as an example, as her dad, as the one who's supposed to be shepherding her heart? I can let her do it, and then we can all give her a little bit of our food. And that's exactly what we did. So context. And think about this. I love sports. I'm a sports fan. I have a number of different favorite teams. There's certain sports I've decided to start liking here in my later life that I never thought I would like. International soccer for one of them. But I'm a fan of American football. And so think about this idea of raising your child in the process. And I like the illustration of football. From 0 to 5, from the time they're born to 5 years old, you're a lot like a referee. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that that's all you are. But think about what a referee does. A referee is constantly calling out the infractions, right? You're a teaching referee. You're explaining what happened and why they missed this and what went on. And you're dishing out the penalties. And this doesn't mean you're not dishing out penalties later, but there's a lot in those early years. But if you're intentional in those early years, hear me, parents of young kids, please don't give in to this lie or this thing, oh, teenagers, yeah, they all rebel, or oh, yeah, teenagers, oh, yeah. You don't have to have that kind of relationship with your teenagers. You can build a relationship and pour into it and shepherd their hearts in such a way that they're not those kind of teenagers. Now, I'm not talking about perfection. There are going to be times. There's going to be problems. There are going to be times when they do things and it's like, what? How could you just ignore everything that I've put into your heart all these years? I get that. But if you are really intentional, don't let things go by in those early years. Be on top of things. And we're going to talk about that throughout this series. But it's tiring. Our daughter and son-in-law at the time of this recording, their kids are 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. And so they are in a season of life where it is constant guidance and correction and consequence. And now, when I say constant, there's a lot of love in that family. There's a beautiful atmosphere of loving God and all of those kinds of things. And I'm going to talk about family atmosphere in this series. That's really, really important. But anyway, you're going to feel like a referee in those early years a lot. But the next years, you're more like a trainer. Okay, if you've been intentional and you've not just the rules, but you've got the relationship going, you're a trainer. You know, you're teaching them the basics of the game. They're getting fit for life. You're preparing them for the teenage years that are going to come later. You're not going to just let the teenage years show up, right? You're going to prepare them for that. They're going to have a sense of otherness already in their heart. They're going to have a sense of serving and being friends to the unfriendly and being friends to the down. All of those things you're going to keep building into their lives in your trainer role, because next you're their coach. And think of the coach. The coach backs off a little more than a trainer. And I'm not thinking of the traditional trainer. Think of a trainer more as the teacher trainer, maybe as a fitness trainer. Okay. But then the coach, they're going out into the game sometimes for themselves. They're coming out on the sidelines. You're giving them direction. You've got a relationship with them. You're motivating them. There are times where they do something totally uncalled for, and you're sitting them down on the bench and you're talking to them, and maybe they're sitting out a game, or you still got that part in their lives. But as a coach, they're getting out into the game of life a little more often. You're letting go. They're getting more responsibility on their own. You know that you can trust them to go over a friend's house now because they've proven this, or you know that they're not going to watch anything that they wouldn't be watching in your home. Those kinds of things, and yes, they fail, and yes, they'll let you down. But as a coach, you're letting go a little bit more, because you don't want to stay a referee and trainer throughout life, right? Because you want to move into that teammate. Now, here's the problem: the permissive parent, even Christian permissive parents, try to be the teammate right away, and you're not called to be the buddies of your kids. Now, you can have a close relationship where they confide in you, and you're transparent with them. And that's a beautiful thing that a lot of parents need to understand, and not be so guarded, and to really share their hearts with their kids. But you'll see on that slide again that process: referee, trainer, coach, teammate. There's intentional parenting along the way. And there's also a little bit of a backing off. Let's go back to listen, O my people. This is Psalm 78, where we started our first session. Remember, we're doing a series, Parenting on Purpose, and the tagline is "so that the generations to come will know," out of Psalm 78. All right. Listen, O my people, to my instruction. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not conceal them from our children, but tell to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wondrous works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should teach them to their children, that the children to come might know, even the children yet to be born, that they may arise and tell them to their children, that they should put their confidence in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. I know that's a long passage, and I started with that, but there's a reason I wanted to come back to it, not just to wrap up the foundation of our calling, but I want you to look at the kind of the breakdown of this, the kind of a basic diagram. Think about it. This verse, or this passage in Psalms, shows three things that we do, and let's look at them in order. And I put parentheses next to each point so that you can look back at the passage and compare them. Okay, so verses 1 through 3, learn and live by the truth. Listen to my instruction. I have something important to say. This is something that's so important. Your fathers have heard it before, the generations have heard it before, but you have to hear it too. Learn and live the truth, verses 1 through 3. Okay, remember. Let me take you back just quickly. Think of the Shema. Think of the words of Jesus. Both of them started with that idea that you have to have it in your heart first. Okay, we're not SEAL trainers. We're not training SEALs. We're not training dogs. We're not, and we're going to get into talking about that kind of parenting a little while, the whole bribing that sometimes happens rather than heart training. But we are parenting in such a way that we have to have it in our hearts first. Okay. Then the next one, establish testimony. You notice I put these all in verbs. These are action related. Learn and live the truth. Establish testimony. In verse 4 and the beginning of 5, that he established a testimony that a testimony in Jacob. The testimony in Jacob, what is it referring to? Well, Jacob referring to all of Israel. He established a testimony in Israel. I mean, we saw the mercy of God, the love of God. And so you establish that testimony in not just your own life, but in your family. That's a weighty responsibility, I know, but to establish testimony in your family. And then the third part there, the next part of verse 5, the three things we do, give it to our children. Learn and live the truth, establish testimony, give it to children. And then the next part, what they do. See the way this breaks down? So if we do those three things, the psalmist says that, verse 6, they accept the truth. Number 7, they confide in God. They put their confidence in God. And number 7, when they put their confidence in God, they're going to yield to God. They're going to obey him. So that sounds like a wonderful, sounds like a very simplistic formula. And that's not my intention at all. But there is a basic understanding in the passages that I've shared with you. Have it in your heart, embrace it wholeheartedly, and be intentional to teach it to the generations to come. Because if I teach it to the generation that comes after me and help teach it to the generation after that, that's going to extend another couple generations and another couple generations. And this idea of passing on faith of people that will rise up and live for God in a world that's frankly very difficult to live for him at times, then we have done what some generations or some families have failed to do, what we see the Hebrews failed to do. And we'll actually come back and look at that pattern in another session of our series. There's a whole bunch of other verses that if you want to stick a screenshot or jot these down, I'll read a couple quickly, but all of these dealing with this idea of following the truth and passing on the truth and internalizing truth. Proverbs 3:3-4, let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. That our kids would be impacted so much by what are the mercy and truth, that they have been shown mercy because we're going to parent that kind of way, and they show mercy to others as a demonstration of God's love in this world, that it's bound around them, that it's so much part of them. Proverbs 8:33, hear instruction and be wise and do not disdain it. Embrace it, live it. Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? There's other passages there. I'm not going to read them all to you, but let me just review some important principles that we've covered over these past 3 weeks, which really make up that first topic of the foundation of our calling. And maybe I should approach this with some questions, like I said in a previous session about be characterized by asking your kids questions so that they talk about the principles. So they are saying the principles that they should be living by, that you've taught them. So let me ask you, what is what I said in a previous session, that if you take away one thing from everything I've said, what's that short word that you need to embrace and be intentional with? Correct. It's the word why. Listen, it takes more work to be a parent who gives the biblical reason why. And sometimes your kids are in a hurry and don't want to hear the reason. Or sometimes they're so young, you're wondering, are they really grasping the reason? Or it's like, well, maybe I don't have to tell them the reason. They know the reason. But to remind them, remember, we do this because we love others. We care about others, because it always comes back to loving God and loving others. Well, again, thank you for being a part of this. And I'm just honored to be able to share with you. Please make sure you come back next week when we're on to the next topic. And that next topic, we are going to be looking at heart training. Now, I know we've talked about heart training, but we're going to get into it even deeper when it comes to the conscience and the biblical definition of heart, soul, mind, and strength, and those aspects of our children's lives and their beings. All right. God bless. See you next week.